Even to this day, whenever I step into a new house, the first thing I do is tap on the walls. My palms instantly break into a cold sweat if I feel any hollow space behind that drywall. All of this paranoia stems from a terrifying incident that happened when I was 16. This isn't some supernatural ghost story meant for cheap jump scares. It's a raw, disturbing experience about a real human threat, something that shattered my sense of safety forever. That year, my parents bought an old property sitting on a 3-acre lot in rural, isolated Oregon. The house itself was undergoing a massive renovation, stripping down the walls and insulation. It was tucked away deep in a dense pine forest, completely isolated, with the nearest neighbor over 5 miles down a dirt road. There was nothing out there but towering trees and a suffocating, eerie silence. One late summer weekend, my parents had to drive back into the city to pick up more building supplies. They decided to leave me behind to watch over the property. They trusted me because I was independent and matured a lot faster than other kids my age. I was incredibly confident back then, even thrilled to have total control over this massive space without anyone watching over my shoulder. I told myself I could handle anything and just enjoy the absolute freedom. But I was dead wrong. The greatest terror didn't come from the pitch-black darkness or the wild animals out in the woods. It was already hiding, inside the house in a place I never would have expected. It was late afternoon, and I was sitting on the living room floor completely locked into a video game when a deafening metallic bang suddenly ripped through the silence. The sound was so violent, I could feel the vibrations rattling the glass panes of the large windows. All my focus on the game vanished instantly, replaced by a cold shiver running straight down my spine. I bolted upright and rushed to the window, looking directly out at the metal storage shed in the backyard. The heavy metal door was wide open, swinging and screeching loudly in the evening wind. I stood frozen for a few seconds, my heart pounding against my ribs because I distinctly remembered latching it shut this morning. That door was way too heavy for the wind to just blow open, unless some immense force had pushed it from the outside. Instead of picking up the phone to call my parents right away, the stubborn pride of a 16-year-old took over. I told myself I had to handle this on my own to prove how independent I was. I walked over to the wooden cabinet in the hallway, grabbed my dad's shotgun, checked it over, and chambered around. Gripping the stock tightly gave me a false sense of security. I opened the front door, stepped out onto the grass alone, and slowly approached the dark metal shed. "Who's in there? I have a gun," I yelled to make my presence known, trying hard to keep my voice from cracking. There was no answer, only the wind whistling through the thick pine trees. I stepped closer, straining my eyes to peer into the dimming interior, which was crowded with old lawnmowers and dust-covered tools. Seeing no one and finding no immediate signs of an intruder, I reassured myself that the latch must have just slipped. I quickly slammed the shed door shut and securely locked the latch from the outside. An invisible wave of unease urged me to get back inside the house as fast as possible. I sprinted across the yard, shoved the front door open, and ran straight up to the second floor. But in that subtle rush of panic, I made a fatal mistake. I only pushed the front door until it clicked into the frame, completely forgetting to turn the deadbolt inside. That tiny oversight practically invited the threat right inside my home. I went back to my bedroom on the second floor. I tried to find some peace of mind by turning on the TV in the corner of the room. I turned the volume up pretty high to let the noise fill the quiet space around me. I hoped the sound of the TV shows would drown out the suffocating unease. About 30 minutes passed in silent tension. Just as I finally started to relax, a strange noise suddenly rang out. It came from right inside the unfinished drywall, right next to the head of my bed. It was a continuous, prolonged scratching sound. At first, I tried to lie to myself that it was just a mouse or a wild squirrel that got in from the roof. But the rhythm of the sound suddenly changed in a bizarre way. The scratching stopped, replaced by the sound of fingernails tapping against the inside of the wall. It tapped slowly, steadily, and with absolute precision. That tapping was mimicking the exact frantic rhythm of my heart beating wildly inside my chest. The blood in my veins completely froze. I stood up, took trembling steps toward the wall, and held my breath. I took a risk and pressed my ear against the thin drywall to listen closer. Instantly, I heard a low, exhausted sigh right next to my ear. Following that was a raspy whisper, mumbling a string of meaningless words right behind the wall. The distance between me and that sound was nothing more than the thickness of a single sheet of drywall. The horrifying reality struck me. The intruder was no longer outside in the yard. He had somehow gotten inside the house. Even worse, he was moving freely through the hollow, interconnected wall system of the house. The shotgun in my hands suddenly felt heavy and completely useless. A wave of pure terror squeezed my throat, freezing my entire body. I realized I was just a 16-year-old kid, and I was nowhere near ready to shoot or take someone's life. Any thought of confronting him on my own vanished entirely. The only goal left in my mind now was to retreat, find a secure hiding spot, and call for help immediately. Clutching the shotgun tightly, I backpedaled out of the bedroom, trying my best not to make a single sound on the hardwood floor. I sprinted as fast as I could into the small bathroom at the end of the second-floor hallway. I gently shut the door and turned the lock inside as carefully as humanly possible. I slid down to the floor, my back pressed hard against the thick wooden door, pulling my knees tight against my chest. My hands were shaking so violently that I almost dropped my cell phone as I dialed 911. Tears were already streaming down my face, completely blurring my vision. "Help me. Someone broke into my house. He's inside the walls." I tried to use the quietest whisper possible to speak to the dispatcher. I was crying and choking back sobs, trying to clearly state my address and my current isolated, dangerous situation. The dispatcher on the other end kept reassuring me and told me to try to stay absolutely silent and hide in place. Right as her sentence ended, a familiar, heavy creaking sound echoed from the wooden staircase. It was the sound of bare footsteps. Step by step, someone was walking up the stairs, slow but carrying a suffocating pressure. That person was entering the second-floor hallway. The bare footsteps continued to move across the wooden floor, the sound getting closer and closer, right toward the bathroom where I was hiding. It stopped right outside the door. A suffocating silence filled the space, freezing my breath and the blood running through my body. It felt like in some way he knew exactly that I was behind this door. Then a deep, raspy, and cold male voice rang out right against the crack of the door. "Hey kid, anyone home?" The sound was so real and so close that my heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest in pure terror. In a state of absolute panic, I decided not to follow the dispatcher's instructions anymore. I pressed firmly on the screen to turn the phone's speakerphone all the way up, letting the strict, urgent voice of the operator echo throughout the room. At the same time, I used every ounce of strength I had left to scream through the door. "I'm on the phone with the police. They are on their way, and I have a gun." Instantly, the bathroom doorknob was violently twisted from the outside. The door rattled violently under the pressure of a brutal push. When he realized the door was locked tight from the inside and heard the warning signs from my end, the twisting stopped. I heard the bare footsteps turn around, hurriedly pacing back down the hallway and running straight downstairs. A few seconds later, a violent slam echoed, shaking the entire house. It was the sound of the front door downstairs being slammed brutally shut. The surrounding space fell into silence once again, leaving only my terrified, heavy panting. But right at the exact moment I heard that door slam, a cold current ran down my entire body as a sickening realization hit me. My own carelessness had directly caused this. When I ran from the metal storage shed in the backyard into the house, because I was in such a rush and thought no one was around, I hadn't locked the front door. I had simply pushed it hard to let it swing shut against the frame. That loose gap had opened the path wide, handing a perfect opportunity for that twisted man to slip into the house, without wasting any effort to break in. The guilt, self-blame, and regret choked my mind, just as painful as the fear of death I felt moments ago. I had accidentally opened the door for death to walk right into my safest place. About 15 minutes later, the red and blue lights of the police car shone through the cracks of the bathroom door, signaling that help had arrived. The roaring sirens shattered the thick, heavy atmosphere of the isolated forest. I stepped outside, my entire body still shaking uncontrollably as I looked at the police officers. They conducted an incredibly thorough search of the house from the inside out. That man had already made a quick escape into the deep darkness of the pine forest out back. However, what the police found right after was what truly dragged me down into the deepest depths of horror. When they tore down an unfinished sheet of drywall in the second-floor hallway, they discovered a large hollow space hidden between the two interconnected wall layers. Inside that cramped and dark space was a miniature landfill of household waste. There were rusted tin cans, half-drunk water bottles, and an old, musty blanket that smelled heavily of mold. Even more sickening, there were a few small slits meticulously carved out, peeking straight into my bedroom and my parents' bedroom. As it turned out, that twisted man had been secretly living inside those walls, weeks before my family even bought the house. He had silently existed like a ghost, quietly watching our every move, every breath, and all our private daily lives. That night, my uncle drove over to pick me up and take me to his place to stay temporarily. Physically, I was safe for the time being, but mentally, I was completely shattered. That wooden house was quickly sold off cheap by my parents right after the incident. We moved elsewhere, but the lesson of complacency at 16 became a psychological scar that would never heal in my mind. I realized that the most terrifying threat in this world isn't something that attacks you head-on from the outside. It is the vulnerabilities, the tiny acts of carelessness created by our own hands. Years have passed, and I am an adult now, but the old habit is impossible to break. Every night before going to bed, I still walk around the house to check and lock every single deadbolt at least 3 times. And even to this very day, whenever darkness falls, if I hear just a tiny noise, a rustle or a faint scratch coming from behind the house walls, I flinch, hold my breath, and quietly wait for a whisper. I was driving my old sedan all by myself across the vast Nevada desert at 2 o'clock in the morning. The clock on the dashboard emitted a faint blue light, pointing to an hour when everyone else should have been fast asleep. Outside the window, the surrounding space was nothing but a thick, endless darkness, so deep that even the shadows of the cacti were swallowed whole. The only sound keeping me company at that moment was the constant, static crackle of the radio. Trying in vain to catch a local station, I glanced down at my phone screen resting on the mount. It had completely lost signal, and the words "no service" flashed on the screen like a chilling reminder. I knew I couldn't contact anyone, nor could I use online maps to pin down my exact location at that moment. The eerie silence of the deserted interstate highway brought a feeling of utter isolation and extreme vulnerability. If anything were to happen out here, there would be no one around to hear me call for help. Just a few hours earlier, everything had been completely peaceful and normal for me. I had just left a small town on the edge of the state after visiting family, and was heading back to the city to make it in time for my shift early next week. Driving through the desert at night was a familiar routine that I usually did a few times a year. I preferred the cool night air over the scorching Nevada heat during the day. I always trusted my car completely, treating this cramped cabin as my safest, most inviolable sanctuary. To me, locking the doors and turning up the music was enough to separate myself from the dangers of the outside world. It was that very complacency and a false sense of security that left me completely off guard against the dark threats quietly stalking me from behind. At the only gas station located on the edge of the desert, I accidentally ran into a strange man driving an old model pickup truck. It was a run-down station with a few rusty pumps and flickering fluorescent lights shining down on the dusty dirt ground. He walked over to me, struck up a conversation very politely, and asked me for the shortest way to get onto the interstate highway. He wore a faded jacket, and there was a long, noticeable scar on the back of his left hand, but his tone of voice was very gentle and deliberate. I didn't suspect a thing, gladly giving him detailed directions, and casually let slip that I would be driving all by myself through the entire night. Instead of thanking me and leaving, he quietly pulled a small notepad out from his jacket pocket. He began scribbling down what I had just said in a very bizarre manner, something he could have easily done on his phone like anyone else would. That gesture made me feel slightly uneasy, sensing that something was a bit off compared to a normal conversation with someone asking for directions. Before turning around to get into his truck, he didn't forget to stare fixedly at my license plate with a calculating and cold look in his eyes. After leaving the gas station and traveling for more than 30 miles on the highway, I suddenly noticed a pair of headlights constantly tailing me from behind, in the middle of this dark, deserted desert. The presence of another car should have made me feel more secure, but I quickly realized that the distance between his pickup truck and my car was always maintained at a completely unchanged interval. I tried to intentionally lower my speed way down to let him pass, but the car behind me immediately slowed down as well. He adamantly held his position right behind my tail, with the 2 blinding beams of light pinning straight into my rearview mirror, making me start to feel annoyed. I tried to calm myself down, thinking it was just another night driver who wanted to follow behind a car to stay alert and avoid getting drowsy. That was a perfectly normal mindset for long-distance drivers. I told myself that to prevent myself from panicking for no reason. However, suspicion and a vague sense of unease still began to brew in my heart as those headlights persistently stalked me through a long, endless stretch of road. Feeling overly stressed and exhausted, I decided to pull into an abandoned rest stop by the side of the road to use the restroom. It was a dilapidated rest area with rusty hallways and peeling concrete walls. The pickup truck behind me also quietly turned off its lights and slowly rolled into a parking spot in the darkest, most secluded corner of the lot. The silence of the surrounding space made me clearly hear my own heart thumping wildly inside my chest. I tremblingly walked into the old, damp restroom, which was thick with the smell of mold. Right as I was standing by the sink, the ceiling light suddenly flickered and went out completely, leaving me in pitch darkness. There was a steady and slow knocking sound coming from the locked stall right next to where I was standing. A hoarse whisper rose from the other side of the wooden partition. "Excuse me, could you spare me a piece of paper towel?" A sense of terror shot down my spine, but I tried to calm myself down and pulled a sheet of paper from the sink area. I crouched down to pass the paper through the gap beneath the restroom stall door. Suddenly, a freezing cold hand tightly grabbed my wrist, pinning it hard against the icy cement floor. I recognized the familiar long scar on the back of his hand under the faint light of my phone screen. He pressed his mouth close to the crack of the door, whispering and reciting the exact numbers on my license plate in a soulless tone. I panicked and screamed, using all the strength I could muster to rip my hand out of his suffocating grip, and fled outside. I rushed straight to the parking lot, jumped inside my car, and locked all the windows in a state of extreme trembling. Cold sweat poured down like rain, and my hands shook so violently that I almost dropped my car keys onto the floor. I tried to dial the highway police using the weak signal bars that had just reappeared on my phone screen. The dispatcher took the information in a flat, monotonous voice, saying that the nearest patrol car would take over an hour to reach my location. They advised me to stay put inside the car, lock the doors tight, and wait until help arrived. A feeling of utter helplessness choked my throat as I realized I was left abandoned in the middle of a desert with no one around. Looking through the rearview mirror, I was horrified to see the man slowly stepping out of the restroom. He stood motionless in the shadows of the rest stop, staring fixedly toward my car like a predator savoring its prey. My phone screen suddenly lit up brightly and let out a cold beep. A system notification popped up, warning me that an unknown tracking device had been continuously monitoring my location this whole time. My heart tightened as I realized he had secretly attached a tracking chip to my car without me knowing. Right at that moment, the man slowly stepped out from the thick darkness of the deserted rest stop. He was no longer pretending or lingering around. He walked straight toward the windshield on my driver's side. Under the dim light of the rest area, he held up that small black notepad right in front of my face. The white page staring back at me had my full name and my exact home address in the city written on it. I froze, my entire body turning to ice as if a bucket of freezing water had been dumped on me in the middle of the desert night. He pressed his gaunt face close to the thick glass, mouthing words with a frantic smile that bared his stained teeth. I could hear his deep, muffled voice slipping through the slight gap in the window. "Don't try to run, because I have already chosen you." The coldness in his eyes made me instantly realize that he no longer wanted to play this game of cat and mouse. The threat had escalated into a direct hunt, and he was preparing to attack me face to face. I frantically turned the key to start the engine. The roar of the motor shattered the dead, silent atmosphere of the Nevada desert. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal to reverse, trying to get away from his outstretched hand. The man let out a terrifying, furious roar as he saw his prey struggling. He pulled a sharp, rusty iron bar from behind his back and smashed it repeatedly against the window where I was sitting. The sound of cracking glass rang out piercingly, and tiny shards splattered across my skin, stinging sharply. My own screams of sheer panic echoed loudly inside the cramped, suffocating cabin. "Help me! Stay away from me!" I shrieked in vain as his arm tried to force its way through the shattered glass to unlock the door. In the absolute peak of my survival instinct, I decided to yank the steering wheel hard. The sedan slammed violently onto the dry, dusty grass, nearly flipping over in the process. I floored the gas pedal, flying straight out onto the main highway ahead at a terrifying speed. Sobbing uncontrollably, I gripped the violently shaking steering wheel with both of my sweaty hands. I just kept my head down, speeding blindly into the darkness ahead, and absolutely did not dare to look back even once. When I had driven a fairly long distance down the highway, and could no longer see the headlights of that pickup truck chasing me, I looked into the center rearview mirror to steady my nerves, only to be utterly horrified as a dark figure slowly loomed up from the back seat. The man had actually sneaked in and hidden inside my car the entire time I was in the rest stop restroom. He leaned his freezing cold face right next to my ear and whispered with a smile, "Just keep driving, pretty girl." Overwhelmed by sheer panic and terror, I slammed on the brakes, causing the car to lose control, spin wildly, and flip over multiple times onto the asphalt. I miraculously managed to crawl out of the bloody wreckage and was saved just in time by a kind truck driver passing by. The police arrived to seal off the scene shortly after, but the psychopath had already vanished into the desert without leaving a single trace. That traumatic experience left a massive psychological scar, forcing me to move to a completely different state to live. I realized that a brief, harmless conversation with a stranger could be the exact mistake that plunges you into a horrifying tragedy. The identity of the scarred man will forever remain a dark, lingering mystery hidden within those deserted night drives. I remember it very clearly. It was a Saturday night in July, around 2 in the morning. A summer storm was brewing, the air was suffocatingly humid, and lightning kept flashing continuously outside the living room window. This apartment was located on the 4th floor of an old building in the suburbs, completely isolated from the bustling downtown area. That night I was home alone because my parents had gone to the countryside for a distant relative's funeral early in the morning, and they wouldn't be back before tomorrow. When you are 17 years old, being home alone on the weekend feels like an absolute privilege of freedom. I was a video game addict who could sit for hours in front of the computer screen without caring about the world around me. With headphones tightly covering my ears, the background music of the game at its most intense phase made me completely lower my guard against any external movements. The only light in the apartment at that moment was the dim blue glow from the computer screen shining directly onto my face, while every other corner was drowned in darkness. The enclosed room gave a false sense of security, making me believe that these 4 concrete walls were completely impenetrable. I didn't hear any strange sounds at all until the match ended, and I took off my headphones to go get a glass of water. Since I was a little kid, my parents had drummed an absolute, unchangeable survival rule into my head for this complicated suburban area: never open the door for strangers when home alone. That rule was repeated so many times that it became a natural reflex, an invisible protective wall in my mind. Although I was tall and big, I was actually still a kid who lacked real-world experience, terrified of facing confrontational or awkward situations with outsiders. My defensive instinct always leaned toward avoidance and self-isolation instead of stepping out to confront someone. It was the strict rule of my family that created a clear boundary between absolute safety inside and potential danger outside. But when that boundary was challenged by a situation that preyed on human compassion, the resolve of a 17-year-old kid began to waver. The knocking came suddenly, 3 sharp raps at a time, echoing between the loud rumbles of the summer storm. Startled, I nearly dropped the glass of water in my hand, walked slowly out to the pitch-black hallway, and looked through the peephole of the thick wooden door. On the other side of the door stood a man in a faded, worn-out delivery uniform, completely drenched in rainwater with his head bowed low. In his arms, he clutched a large cardboard box, its edges torn and heavily soaked with blotches of rainwater. I didn't open the door, only calling out through the gap, "Who is it? I didn't order anything at this hour." The delivery guy didn't look up, his voice rasping and faint as if he had a severe case of laryngitis. "Urgent delivery. The sender requested it to be handed over to the homeowner directly right now." He emphasized that the sender had paid a massive amount of money for this item to be brought inside the house without a single minute of delay. His gestures were incredibly bizarre. His feet kept twitching restlessly up and down, and one of his hands was slid deep underneath the bottom of the cardboard box, holding a very rigid posture. I refused to open the door, and told him to just leave the package out in the hallway, saying I would get it myself tomorrow morning. Instantly, the delivery guy snapped his pale face up, his eyes wide and staring intensely straight into the peephole as if he knew exactly where I was standing. His tone shifted completely, no longer faint but becoming rapid and full of resentment. "It's freezing and pouring rain out here. How could you have the heart to leave me standing here?" It only takes a second to open the door and sign for it. My forced politeness began to turn into extreme awkwardness mixed with a vague sense of dread. I tried to explain that my parents weren't home, and I wasn't allowed to open the door for anyone at night. He didn't say anything else, but a smile began to spread across his wet face, a distorted, unmoving grin that didn't fit the situation at all. The atmosphere in the apartment hallway, usually quiet, suddenly became suffocating and carried a distinct flavor of threat. I decided to back away, turned the deadbolt of the main door twice to secure it, and turned around to head back to my bedroom. Not long after I sat back down at my desk, the knocking from the main hallway started again, this time much more rapid and aggressive than before. I deliberately tried to ignore it, putting my headphones back on to drown out the noise, but the heavy pounding on the door vibrated right through the concrete floor. Suddenly, a completely different sound emerged. A faint, scraping scratch coming from the small balcony right outside the kitchen. My apartment was on the 4th floor, so theoretically, no one could just climb up from the outside unless they used the drainage pipe or the adjacent balcony of the abandoned apartment next door. I immediately muted my computer speakers, my heart hammering violently against my chest as I realized my safe zone was being surrounded. I rushed into the kitchen, not daring to turn on the lights, only creeping behind the curtain to peer out at the dark balcony drenched in rain. The scratching sound stopped, but the dark silhouette of someone suddenly darted past the glass door, blocking out the flashes of lightning outside. My attention was now completely pulled away from the video game, my entire mind straining to figure out how to handle an impending break-in. In the middle of my panic in the kitchen, the knocking at the front door abruptly stopped and was replaced by the doorbell ringing repeatedly. I hurried back to the peephole of the main door once again and saw a second man, dressed neatly in a dark windbreaker. This guy looked to be about 30 years old, his face showing clear signs of panic and extreme anxiety as he looked inside through the door gap. He called out loudly through the door, "Hey kid, did you see a drenched delivery guy pass by here? I'm the shift manager for the ride-hailing and delivery company." He explained that the delivery guy from earlier was a mental patient who had escaped from a facility, stolen a uniform and a motorcycle from a company employee to deliver empty boxes just to harass or extort people. This incredibly logical explanation made me breathe a small sigh of relief, and I actually considered cracking the door open to help this manager deal with the creep. The manager kept urging me, "Open up and let me in to shelter from the rain for a bit. Then I'll call the cops to catch him. He's hiding around here somewhere." But just as I placed my hand on the lock, I suddenly noticed a glaringly absurd detail. The manager's windbreaker was completely bone dry, without a single drop of rainwater on it, even though he claimed he had just run up from the courtyard in the middle of a pouring storm. I pulled my hand back from the deadbolt, my entire body turning ice cold as I realized both of them were playing parts in a perfect theatrical act to trick me into opening the door. Right at that moment, the noise at the kitchen balcony escalated violently into a loud shatter of breaking glass. Someone had used a heavy object to smash the small glass pane of the balcony door, trying to reach a hand inside to unlock the kitchen latch. I had no other choice but to sprint into my bedroom, locking the door tight and pushing the heavy particle board wardrobe to block the entrance. Cowering on the bed in the dark, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps stomping from the kitchen straight into the living room. The footsteps stopped right in front of my bedroom door, accompanied by the spine-chilling sound of metal scraping and dragging along the tiled floor. A voice called out from the other side of the bedroom door, the exact same raspy, faint voice of the initial delivery guy. "You're hiding pretty well. We brought a gift for you right here." Through the dim gap under the bedroom door, I could see the silhouette of a small iron axe blade, its sharp edge reflecting the lightning flashes from my bedroom window. At that exact moment, my phone plugged in on the desk began to vibrate continuously with the sharp beeps of new incoming messages. They were consecutive texts from a completely strange number that wasn't in my contacts, their contents so brief they made the blood in my veins freeze over. The back door of the abandoned apartment next door wasn't locked. We crossed over the balcony real easy. "Open the front door. My friend has been waiting out there for a long time. Your parents won't make it back in time to pick up your corpse, little boy." I realized that the cardboard box from the beginning was never meant to hold any goods. It was a tool used to conceal weapons and hide from the building's hallway cameras. The words of that fake manager were merely a psychological trap designed to force me into choosing one of two paths that would lead to me unlocking the safety boundary with my own hands. The seamless coordination among the three strangers, the delivery guy, the fake manager, and the intruder from the balcony, proved that my apartment had been targeted for a very long time. What was their actual motive? Robbery, kidnapping, or some sick, twisted game of serial killers? I had absolutely no idea. Even though I was terrified to the point that my teeth were chattering uncontrollably, I decided not to scream and absolutely refrained from trying to unlock the door to run out into the main hallway. I knew the layout of my bedroom perfectly. The particle board wardrobe was heavy enough to delay their break-in by at least 10 minutes. I kept completely silent, lying flat on the floor and pulling the thick duvet over my head to muffle the sound of my heavy breathing. I didn't have a personal cell phone at the time to call the police. The device receiving those texts was actually an old iPad with no SIM card, which could only receive messages through a social media app whenever it caught the Wi-Fi signal. There was no one coming to the rescue, no hero appearing in the middle of this dark, isolated suburban storm. My entire survival at that moment depended solely on my endurance and keeping a cold head not to make any more mistakes. The sound of the axe blade, scraping against the wooden bedroom door, dragged on for about 5 minutes, then suddenly stopped completely. A deathly silence enveloped the entire apartment, leaving only the sound of rain pattering outside through the shattered balcony door. The next morning, when the first light of Sunday filtered through the curtains, I finally dared to push the wooden wardrobe aside and step out. My parents walked into the house just 10 minutes later, completely horrified to see the wreckage in the kitchen, with glass shards scattered everywhere. The main door was still locked tight, but on the wooden surface of my bedroom door, there were 3 deep gash marks, exposing the pale inner wood fiber underneath. My dad immediately called the local police to dust for fingerprints and file a report recording an intentional aggravated burglary. However, the police couldn't find any usable latent fingerprints because all of those men had worn medical-grade rubber gloves. When they checked the apartment building's hallway security cameras, the lens had been covered up with black duct tape by a strange hand, starting at 11 o'clock the previous night. To this very day, now that I am a grown man, I am still deeply haunted by the unanswered questions of that night. How did those people know my parents would be gone for the whole night to choose the exact perfect moment to strike? What did that drenched cardboard box actually contain from the very beginning, besides that sharp iron axe? And the most terrifying thing is, if that night I had lowered my guard for just a single second and cracked the door open for the delivery guy or that polite manager, would I even be alive today to tell this story?